Well, welcome everybody. I see that there's people still joining us. I see lots of names and faces that I recognize. I'm so excited today to be able to introduce my friend Kathy Tencza. I was thinking about this the other day, Kathy. I think I met you in the fall of 1984, and we were both master students in the instructional systems program taking a course by Robert Gagne. I
That
think
seems
that's where
right.
we met. Yeah. And so over the years, of course, Kathy and I have stayed in touch. She's been an instructional design consultant, owning her own uh, business for over 25 years. Prior to that, she did work as an instructional designer for places like Florida Power and Light. Um, so she is a graduate of our master's program. She says that her degree shaped her life in many positive ways. She treasures the many people of all ages that she's met through this program, some of whom she has hired, and some of whom she has been able to find consulting work with. Her expertise is engaging people, facilitating decision
Just
making,
to say,
and making things
I
pretty.
love it.
Um,
Thank you, thank
she
you.
You're welcome.
enjoys working with clients from around the world. And for those of you that have, and I always have to give this plug, I know Bob Reeser's on here. Kathy not only gives her time to the program, she also gives her money. She has been a regular contributor to both the Gagne Briggs Fund and the Instructional Systems Student Association. So we appreciate that, because that's how our students can get scholarships and fellowships and travel to conferences. So Kathy is one of those alumni who's, when research started the Alumni Association back in the last century, Kathy was one of the first people to raise her hand and say, sure, I'll help. So I'm happy to introduce Kathy Tencza. And Kathy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm so happy to be here. And let me go ahead and pull up the screens I need and get started. Okay. So I'm so excited to see so many people here. I won't be able to probably look as much now that I'll have to pay attention, but I can't wait to see who all is on the call. So I did this thing called a Padlet, and if you it should have been in part of the email, one of the emails you sent when you registered, or the one Demetria sent to remind you. But let me just show you what that looks like. Jim, can you see the Padlet on my screen with the blue background?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so what this is just like a little web-based bulletin board. And you can see that a lot of people have already participated and added some comments around the topic at the top. Managing client feedback, people added diagrams that were helpful, or sent links to articles that you can just click on and go to. And some people posted questions, and then other people can respond to them. So for any of these, you can go ahead and like it by pressing the little heart. You can add a comment if you like, or if you want to add your own new item, just hit the plus button at the top of any of these columns and just start typing. And so that's how the Padlet works. I hope we can use it after this meeting to continue the conversation. I've learned so much already. And just a weird, quirky thing is there's a little scroll bar just to the right of each of these columns. So that's how you go up and down. It's not really that intuitive to me, but anyway. So let's go back now to our slides. So as you saw on the Padlet, the topic of today's presentation is managing client feedback. And when I first started creating this program, I reached out to some well-known successful IDs for advice and ideas. And no, I think all but one of these are graduates of the program. So we know they're good. And what I found was, first of all, a wealth of information, which I incorporated either into the Padlet or into the presentation or both. Second, I learned that we don't all have a common understanding of what the topic even means. People sent me great information about like how to accept feedback and how to not take it personally, and how to give feedback and developmental feedback versus coaching feedback. And I'm not going to talk about any of those things. Those are all fantastic topics. And I think one of my colleagues, either in this list here or somebody else on this call, should volunteer to do another session on that, because I think it's great. But in this topic, we are just going to talk about project feedback. And by that, I mean the feedback you must get at each stage of the design and development process in order to successfully complete the project. So this feedback is about the product, not about you, even though it sometimes can feel extremely personal because the product is like your child. So we're going to look at some specific real life examples for what you might find in the world. But let's talk about why we might even need to have this discussion in the first place. Now close your eyes and think if this is the way you have experienced feedback on a project. You got exactly the right feedback from the right people, the right time, all clear and understandable. One thing's just flowing to another. Everybody who was supposed to weigh in did. No conflicts. If that's the way it always works for you, please type perfect into the chat box. I'm looking over at, that's on my other screen. Nobody's writing that. So then probably it's more likely then that the dream is not the reality. Here's the reality. And the reason we have to have this discussion is because you may have had some of these less positive experience. Feedback coming in too late, or feedback coming in from the wrong people. For example, maybe you're doing a systems rollout and you've heard a ton of stuff from the people who are the systems designers, but you haven't heard anything from the users or their bosses. So that's the case of not getting getting feedback from the wrong people. Maybe it's at the wrong time. I've been in the situation where someone tries to give feedback on the basic design when you're supposedly cleaning up the second draft of something, or conversely, people who want to focus on like wording when you're like, oh my gosh, this is just brainstorming. It's way too early for that. Also missing feedback, just can't get it when you need it. And then conflicting feedback. So these are all, not actionable. That's a really good one. An example of that is someone who says, let's make sure that we really focus on the main points here. Thank you. So anyway, these are all problems that have happened to me many, many times, and I haven't solved them all yet, but I have learned a lot, and I have found some strategies that make a big difference in minimizing these. I'm going to focus on 3 different areas today. First of all, with starting the project right, before you even tackle the instructional design, what are some things you can do that'll make feedback much better? Then when you get to a certain review point, what do you do to prepare for that? And then in the actual review, what do you do to facilitate that meeting? So I'm going to present one scenario for each of these 3 solutions, and I'm going to ask you to weigh in on them as well. So now that we have kind of said what we mean by managing client feedback, how do you feel about this topic? Demetrius, if you could load that poll and go ahead and put in your vote. Nice. Okay, let's go ahead. I see it's kind of tilting, but it's kind of settling in. Can you go ahead and end that? Or I guess I can end it on Demetrius. So are you seeing the results now? Perfect. So I think it's great that so many people are curious and excited. I'm glad that you all had a chance to have lunch. So yeah, let's just continue onward. Okay. So here's the first scenario. This is a client, and I'm calling it Hotels Unlimited. In reality, though, they are one of the biggest hotel chains in the world, like a hotel conglomerate. And they wanted to do a worldwide service rebranding. And that's not a branding like that the public would ever see, more just how people who work there viewed their service style. So think of something like, oh, be our guest, or this is your home away from home, or human connections. And they wanted to roll this out globally, over 100 countries. And they wanted to have examples from all hotel departments. So like food and beverage, housekeeping, front desk, reservations, et cetera, et cetera. And they wanted to, of course, if they're including all departments, it includes people with limited literacy, like people who are in housekeeping or in groundskeeping who might not be able to read at all, so couldn't rely on reading. And they wanted to make it available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin just to start. So you also had that issue of keeping the language simple enough for people for whom those weren't their first languages. And also the cultural issues of, well, like if is a style that works in the US, like, hi, Kathy, welcome to our hotel, that might not work in a more formal society where they might want to say, good afternoon, Mrs. Tencza, and welcome back. So there was a lot of challenges, but then we had opportunities too, because we had a really top-notch video production company that in a huge budget. So we had the ability to travel the world to create instructional videos, and they had fantastic project management. So what were some of the things that we did in this case to help us manage client feedback? In this one, we're going to focus on the idea of starting the project right. So you see on your screen now just a whole bunch of questions. And all of these probably could have sub-questions, and there could be additional ones. To me, the big point is all of these questions are super, super useful. Like, why not ask upfront exactly where those review points are going to be? Why not get clarity on who should review? But the bigger thing is, I think when you ask all these questions upfront, you are setting a tone for professionalism and mutual expectations so that they know, oh, this consultant, whether you're internal or external, they think things through. They're organized. They know what to expect. They can help us to shape things. And I think setting that tone early is just really important, and it'll help later when you do have to manage maybe some difficult feedback. Let's see, the how many, I'm going to talk about that one in a minute. Feedback versus approval. I think it's just it's important to be super clear about who the people are that you really need to listen to. Like, yes, get all the feedback you want from Jennifer, but like if Caitlin says it, consider it a command. So those are good questions to ask up front. And one of the people I contacted for this presentation was Chris Yancetti, and he said, he just asks, how has feedback been dealt with in the past? And I think that's just a fantastic wide open question, because if you ask that, people will tell you a lot that you need to know about the politics of the situation. Methods, I think it's important to kind of think about upfront. Are we going to be sending people stuff that they review independently? Or are we going to show it to them live, either in a meeting or a virtual meeting? Or some combination of both. Like maybe you set up a live meeting, do a walkthrough, let them look at it on their own, and then come back and do another live meeting. So setting up kind of what methods you're going to use. And then what about resolving differences? It's just helpful to ask that up front, because then when there are differences, where marketing says this and sales says that, you can go back to, at the beginning of the project, we discussed that this is how we are going to look at this. So let's see if that's helpful. And then risk assessment is just talking up front in the project about what we're going to do if people don't respond, don't show up, just all those what if things. What if the feedback is excessive? And another thing Chris Yancetti suggested that I think is awesome is to look at your total project budget and then have the client have a separate pot of money that's about 10% of that budget that's kind of set aside and allocated, that gets triggered if your feedback exceeds a certain amount. Like if you're getting feedback on the learning objectives when you're in the second draft, or if your feedback based on your first draft requires more than 20% of the changes, those sort of things, then it would trigger spending that extra pot of money. Getting that done up front just makes it very easy later on. It's not like you're sitting there going, oh, should I ask for more money? Or oh, I guess I just have to suck up all this extra cost, and but it's more just, okay, you know, as we discussed, this feedback now is exceeding what we had planned for, so we'll need to access that money. I don't know if Chris is on this call or not, but if he is, thank you. Okay, so this slide just shows if when you're doing planning some typical review points. And I wanted to point out here, like look and feel and design are often done at the same time, but you just want to make sure that both of those are done. And look and feel could include anything from graphic style to fonts to voices to anything like that. And then the design, I mean the instructional design. And one thing you would notice here is that some of the product types, you know, have certain reviews in common, but one of the online and the video are of course going to have scripts. And so for those two right here, you just want to make sure that when you're going over this at the beginning, that they understand that once that script is approved, that there will be additional cost, effort, and time if you have to go back later and re-record. So just kind of talking people through like what happens when you decide after something's been recorded. And this chart shows how people fit into this. And I've put stars over here by the ones that where I would actually like go around the room and say, we need formal approval at this point. Do you approve Valerie? Do you approve Sarah? You know, and however many people it would be, and try not to end that meeting until I heard that from everyone. Even if it's like, if we make the following 5 changes, will there be approval? But what I noticed looking at this is it looks like Brian is kind of maybe like a technical guy. He's going to be like your down and dirty, get information from him guy. And it looks like Marco, maybe he's more of a big picture guy, but still someone you're mostly getting information from. And it looks like Valerie and Sarah are really the 2 people that you have to get some serious approval from. And I also note that Sarah doesn't come in till halfway through. So I might be asking, like, how do we make sure that Sarah's views are represented if she's not going to come in until the design phase? So that's just some samples that I created for you guys. So let's go back to our example of Hotels Unlimited wanting to rebrand their service style over 100 countries. Which of these questions are you most curious about? Please answer the poll. Very interesting. Okay, just maybe 10 seconds, choose an answer. Okay, let's go ahead and show the results. It looks like we've got the majority of people, Demetrius. Okay, so it looks like really people were most curious about the EVP and focusing on each review point. So let me share with you what actually happened in this project. After we created, I don't know how many dozens of videos because there just were a lot and they all had to be done in 3 languages. At the very end, the EVP said that he did not want the word joy to be present anywhere, not in writing, not in what the instructor said, not in the management materials, and definitely not in the videos. And his reasoning was that another hotel chain was using the word joy in its marketing materials, and so he didn't want to be compared. Well, I mean, we had to scrub through every single script to look for any, like where someone said, oh, it brought me a lot of joy to, you know, welcome the family and blah, blah, blah. But then we had to go and reshoot that. So finding out what the EVP really wanted, I don't know if we could have found it out ahead of time, but knowing that now, it's something I ask going forward. Like, is there somebody who's ultimately only going to see this at the end? And how can we make sure that we're getting what that person wants all the way through? That was a huge budget to take that production crew to those countries again to reshoot, just to take out the word joy. So those who picked that, I don't know if you picked up on that, but that was a huge issue. should we include all hotel departments in our review? I did ask that, and it ended up in this case not being important. All we needed the departments for was to give us specific scenarios and examples, but this was more driven by marketing. And so whether or not those departments approved was kind of neither here nor there. What should we focus on during each review point? Yeah, that was super critical because this was the first time that that big video production company was working with an instructional designer. And it was my first time working with that company. So we had to kind of level and say, well, when do you guys typically get reviews? Well, when you say alpha review, what does that mean to you? And then, we kind of compared notes and had to line it all up for the client in a very tight way. So that was a really, really good question to ask for that. When will we have sign off points? Yeah, I don't remember that being a big issue. And then how will we resolve differences among the many stakeholders? We did end up having differences between what the brand people wanted and what the operations people wanted. And this was a case where asking that up front was actually really helpful because the project manager, their internal project manager, ended up taking that on as a responsibility, and it worked really well. Okay, we can get rid of that poll. Thanks, Demetrius. Okay, so next I'd like to ask you, maybe if you could use the chat to just kind of, what other thoughts do you have related to this scenario? Are there other questions you would have wanted to ask? Are there other tips that you have from projects you're involved in? And again, I'd like to focus now just on the project planning aspect of it. Okay, I'll just continue on. And thank you for that comment, Susan. Okay, so here's our next scenario. This is Call Centers Anonymous. And this isn't the client, but just think like Netflix. And if you wanted to order Netflix, then you called their 800 number, you would get connected with a salesperson that would be responsible for, first of all, trying to convince you to sign up and then taking care of the sign up itself. So this is a very similar type of position. They're sales, but they're taking calls inbound, not calling out. And they had an 8-week onboarding program because they had to teach people all about every product that the company offered and about this really wacky old computer system that they were using that was quirky. And then they had to teach them what they call talk and type. So how do you engage with the customer at the same time while you're doing all the ordering information, which requires some fluency. And they did not want it to be 8 weeks anymore. So our goals were to reduce the time, which we did propose reducing from 8 weeks to 4, to standardize it across 6 huge call centers. This was all US based, but each one of these call centers onboarded hundreds of new agents every year. So you're talking a big churn. And what we realized is it could involve changes to the job descriptions in terms of like what a trainer does and who the trainers are and who coaches and all that stuff. So that was a challenge. And there was a lack of transparency among these 6 big call centers. They didn't tell each other what they did because they did it differently from what was considered standard. And they didn't necessarily want to share that, but they all had their own closely guarded little ways that they did onboarding. For the opportunities, we did have an opportunity to use a new IVR system, which routes phone calls so that, for example, if you pressed close my account, press number 3. If you press number 3, we could route only those calls to new people. So it meant that instead of waiting 5 weeks to take your first customer call because you needed to be able to handle everything, you could take your first customer call during week 1 and start building proficiency, because if all you had to do was cancel accounts, it's pretty simple. So let's talk about how we manage client feedback. In this one, I'm talking about presenting the macro design. So in this case, the design was really going to change the way they did things, going from 8 weeks to 4, going from presenting all the product information first to weaving product information in with systems information and in with conversations. So here's some things we did. First of all, and these are just good general tips, is pre-align. Let's say that the lady on this slide, her name is Leslie, and you just know Leslie, she's gonna pick something and she's like a dog with a bone on it, and she's gonna take up 20 minutes of every meeting, you know, really just chewing that bone. And so maybe what you can do is call Leslie before the meeting and say, hey, I just want to do a sneak preview, a meeting with you and get your feedback. It might not work, but it might work. It might do, maybe she just needs to be heard by someone. And once she gets it off her chest, then she'll let the meeting go smoothly. Or you might find out something super important from somebody that you're pre-aligning with that you need to incorporate into the design that could have meant a smooth meeting if you hadn't followed up. So pre-aligning with key stakeholders before you go into a review point, I think is a winning strategy. Don't wing it. Know your material backward and forward. In this case, we had this full design, and we probably had a deck. I don't know, it was a long deck. And so we had to sit there and really be prepared. Like, what are the key points we want to make with this new design? How are we going to pull people in and show them the rationale? What questions are we going to ask them? In what order? What information are we going to present? Using what graphics? We knew that, and then we practice it, and we knew that backward and forward. To me, it was like a pitch. It was like a pitch deck. So we had it ready to present to that client. It was a big change. Know when you need genuine feedback versus a rubber stamp. There's a lot of times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just need to find out from people, like, is this the type of content that we're talking about here? Or does this example make sense to support this point? And so I'm really looking for specific feedback, and I'm going to flag all those as I'm going through before my meeting and get the questions ready around it. There's other times where I'm just like, look, I feel pretty well. I'm pre-aligned. Everybody's been kind of working on this together. I just want to rubber stamp this. So just that knowledge in the back of your own head of what your purpose is, I think really can help you. Manage how you present the information. Are you going to send it out? Are you going to do it live? What's your rationale for doing so? What are the risks of either way? Think that through. And then how are you going to handle differences between one reviewer and another? And let's say you get one reviewer, Joaquin says, this is way too short. Like, we need to expand this. People need to know about this aspect and that aspect. You know, we need to have a real hands-on workshop for this. And over here, then Marina is saying, I think we can just make this a little micro learning, throw together a 2-minute video, send it in the email, and we're done. So how do you resolve that? And obviously those are two different standpoints, but is it going to be asking the client to kind of consolidate that feedback and make it work? Or is it going to be something where you kind of have a conversation with just the two of them? Do you bring it up in a group? So I would say thinking those things through beforehand, again, just makes you look more prepared and professional. Okay, so what do you think, given our call center and that we're presenting this macro design, that's a big change for the organization, which meeting planning strategy would best ensure project success? Demetrius? Oh, and while you guys are doing that, I see in the chat box, Becky said, I made to send out invites for all reviews in the future to bookmark it on people's calendars. Gosh, that's an excellent idea, because it's horrible to, I think it's just bad client service to say, oh, I'm done with the first draft. Can you review it by Tuesday? Like, no. So thanks, Becky. Don says, if the project is successful, what does success look like? I mean, that's an awesome question that has to do with not just feedback, but really every aspect of the project. So thanks, Don. Okay, it looks like we have about a third of half of the people in. So I'll wait till we're at like 3/4. So go ahead and put your answer. There's no wrong answer. Okay, that's about 3/4 of the people. If you want to end it and display it, that'd be great, Demetrius. Okay, so it looks like everybody was kind of curious about previewing the design, first draft, et cetera, with leaders at each of the call centers separately. So I totally agree with that. That's a great strategy. What we found out, so there's always like a little individual catch, isn't there, is that one of the call centers was like the big head honcho center. You know, like, oh, in theory, they were 6 equal centers, but one was like the head of that call center had a special relationship with the president of the company, and had like the most new employees, and they were viewed as being in a high growth area of the country, blah blah blah. So what it really turned out was she was the one that we needed to pre-align with every single point, and maybe some other people, but we knew if she put up a red flag that it wasn't going to go, and she was going to influence everyone else. And she might even just walk that up the chain to make sure she got what she wanted. So that was that was a good call out insight from you guys. Sending a strong no, nobody said that. Okay, I won't even address that. Think deeply about stakeholder concerns when drafting your pitch. Yes, definitely. We thought of every single person who would have to approve it and what things they would most want to happen, or to Don's suggestion, what success looked like to them, and made sure to address that in the pitch. And then asking someone on the client side to consolidate feedback. We ended up not doing that at this point for the macro design, it being something that was going to drive a ton of budget and 6 to 9 months of work. We wanted to have them all together. But once we did get back where we were developing, I don't know, I think we had like 40 captivates and all these little checklists and live training, and we just needed to get that stuff reviewed, then yes, then we asked them to consolidate it. Okay, let's move on. Close that out. So any other ideas or strategies related to our call center onboarding redesign? If you want to just put that in the chat, love to see you guys contributing. I know you all have good ideas. Okay, we'll continue to do it, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat on my other screen here, so I'll move ahead. But if you have ideas, go ahead and enter them there. Oh, Becky wants to know, did it help to do a live review versus a self-serve method? I think it very much helped at the beginning to get everyone on the same page with the fact, like, going from 8 weeks of training to 4 weeks of training was a bombshell for them. And I don't think that would be something that you could just say, okay, everybody, we're sending an email. We're going from 8 weeks to 4 weeks, and this is how we're going to do it. Are you okay? It was just too, there were too many things to discuss with that and answer questions. So for that, we did do a live review. So I think it really helped. I just think at that point, the questions were too big to get just individual input. Thanks for that question. Okay, so now we have our third and final client. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. And this is a pharmaceutical company, and this is different. The two first examples I gave were real big projects in different ways. This was a tiny project, just one 90-minute module, live online, and we're going to take this one drug, and I think it was an antidepressant, and we're just going to go over, content knowledge around it, like who's the drug for, who's it not for, what's the efficacy, what's the safety, blah, blah, what's the state, and then what the sales pitch was, like what information and strategies do you use to sell this drug to, I think in this case it was to physicians. So 90-minute, easy peasy, put it together all day long. And you're just trying to get feedback on the design. The challenges were pre-COVID, this would have been a 90-minute session that would have been in a fancy hotel in a fancy location as part of an annual 3-day sales conference. And what those are like, it's just like 3 days of social stuff and eating and drinking and learning and meeting and having keynotes address. And then they said, well, with COVID, what we're going to do is have 3 days of Zoom calls. So that was a little bit of a challenge for that one. But the opposite side of that is they had kind of gotten in a rut of how they did training, like they had the same instructional strategy. They just rinse and repeat every single year with every single drug. And so, this was a chance to think about things a little differently. So for this one, I'd like to focus on the facilitation aspect, the actual meeting where we got feedback. And I said, this was the feedback on the design. So the design was like, okay, here's our objectives, what we want to do. Here's the key takeaway points that we want them to remember when they leave this session. And we propose having 5 sections, like there's going to be a breakout activity here, and there's going to be a large group activity here, blah, blah, blah. That was the design. And so my tips here for you are these. One, you should have a point of view, like go in with a clear recommendation and a rationale for it. It doesn't mean you can't ask questions and be open to feedback, but it does mean don't ask questions for which you either already have the answers or you already should have the answers, stuff that you should have asked earlier. So, I've seen people kind of blow it a little bit by not being forceful enough and just saying like, well, we could have this breakout activity, and they could discuss this instead of like putting it forward to say, this is a great opportunity for people to break out into small groups and have this type of discussion in order to, reach this goal. So I guess having a point of view to me just means you present something with confidence. Maintain control of the agenda. So you should be very clear. Here's what we're going to accomplish. We have 45 minutes to do it. We're going to spend the first 15 minutes doing this, then the next 15 here, and then the final 15 planning for our next steps. They should know that you are in charge and that you are going to facilitate them to the correct conclusion, so that they don't start feeling like this person has not mastered this feedback meeting, and so we all need to start stepping in and managing it for him or for her. Like, no, that's not going to serve you or them well. So you want to have that credibility that I can lead you through this. I can take your feedback and I can turn it into an action step. Be clear on risks if needed. If a requested change is going to add to a budget or a timeline, say so. Not because you didn't listen. If they have a change like, didn't we tell you to do this? Then I wouldn't express that had any risks associated with it. If you know something would change the budget, go ahead and offer a solution. A way you can phrase that is, yes, we can totally add those animations. But if we do that, we'll just have to deprioritize this other thing. Is everyone okay with that? So offering solutions that, instead of just saying, no, that's outside the scope or that's outside the budget, just kind of being that more positive side, I think is helpful. Speaking with confidence. So I would say, don't say things like, well, how do you want to change this? But I'm going to continue on unless there's any comments. Not, well, let me know if you think this is silly, but saying, we decided with this scenario to go with a playful approach. Let me know if that will kind of capture the learner's imagination. Let me know if this will resonate with these folks. So just a different way to frame your questions. And then make sure that, and this is something that Claire also, when I talked to her prior to this, really emphasized, is being very clear about what actions that you're going to take based on that. Like saying things like, would it address your concern if we did this? Okay, great. Or if it's just really hard to nail them down, what specific action would you suggest to resolve this problem? All things to do during the meeting. And if I sound like I'm trying to lead the clients too much, I mean, I guess I am, but I also think that you have to make sure to allow for them to have genuine and important input. Like, it's not just about, I'm just gonna like herd you through this experience, but just be careful about what questions you ask when you ask them in order to meet the goals of the meeting. So if it's a design meeting and you want an approval on that, where do you truly need feedback and where do you need them to just kind of buy into the vision? And then another thing, just don't take it personally. I don't know how you do that, except that I've been doing this for a long time and it gets less personal the more I do it. So hopefully that'll help. All right, so we don't have a poll for this last thing. Let's see what's in the thing. Oh, hey, Jane, nice to hear from you. I did a large project with 3 call centers, and we also worked with the client to reroute calls to the new learners based on experience. We paired the new learners, excuse me, a sneeze, with well, after 1 week of training with a mentor to take calls, we did the same thing. We must have copied, one of us copied the other, Jane. And then Susan, which means being super prepared and knowledgeable of the issues people might have. That's right, like knowing your customer. And this is where I'm a little bit at a disadvantage because I'm often working with people I don't know anything about. So if you're working internally and you know like what kind of things trigger different people and what is the most important thing to them, like is the most important thing to them innovation, or is the most important thing saving time, like that information can be super helpful. Thanks, Susan. And thanks, Becky, too. Yeah, anticipate needs. So I don't have a poll question for this last one, but do you guys have any ideas for how I can facilitate this design meeting with my pharmaceutical company? Okay. Move on. Okay, coming toward the end now. So this to me is just like, when I say things that keep it fun, there might be like a little winky, sarcastic face after that because these things often are not fun. So feedback in the form of a question is just something that absolutely makes me nuts. And it happened in that pharmaceutical project where this one group of people never said what they wanted. They just asked questions in writing, you know, like we're talking about making comments on a PDF or something to say, are we really hitting on the most important points here? Or I just wonder if this is what the participants are expecting, or just anything that was like so not actionable. And then another thing that makes me nuts is no feedback from the key approver until final is ready. I already told you about that with the hotel thing. That was such a nightmare. It's sticking with me. And then, oh, guess and check. So I had a contract a couple of years ago, and I don't know, somebody on this call might have been involved in it with a cruise company. And the guy said he would never be really super clear on what he wanted, but his big direction is, I will know it's right when it makes me cry. So we had to, gosh, I wish you guys weren't all on mute because I bet you're laughing, but we literally had to just keep guessing what he wanted until we came across something that made him cry. And then it was all good from there. And then another thing that can make me nuts is, yeah, what a nightmare, you got it, is late input. And this was one, I did a workshop for a client and I was facilitating it. They specifically wanted that. And I had a bunch of work built around having a scenario. And I kept asking for that scenario. And I got it when I was on the plane going to the city to do it. So Beth Sheets, somebody the one person that I reached out to who's not an ISD alumni from FSU, but she's a great designer. She said she gives her clients a little cheat sheet at the beginning with examples and non-examples of actionable feedback. So she'll have like, here's some things that aren't actionable. Put more structure in the OJT. This deck needs rewording. These instructions are incorrect, sort of thing. And then she gives some examples of actionable feedback like, this is very outdated. We recommend you update the terminology to this. Or the talking points on the slide needs to move just to the right a little bit because it's off balance. So that was an idea from Beth's sheet. So thanks, Beth. So just to go over it again, here were the problems that we all experience at one time or another. Too late, wrong people, wrong time, missing feedback, conflicting feedback, not actionable feedback. And the solutions, you know, just think of it in 3 phases. What I can do before anything starts, what I can do before each review point, and then what I can do during the review point. And then the 4 ideas I would hope that you would walk away with are just be purposeful. Like at every point, know what you need to get out of that and what will really help the client in the long run to build a real solid functional working relationship where feedback is productive. Pre-align, talked about that a lot. Confirm understanding, which is to me to say, I hear that you are saying that you would prefer that this activity be done in pairs instead of individually. So we're going to make that change. So just that constant rephrasing of what you've heard and making sure that they know, yes, I get what your feedback is about. Even if it's something more nebulous, like you feel like the language is maybe a little simple through here, and we need to provide richer examples, and I'll work with Richard to get those. Okay, great. And then the final thing is always be checking. And I did not really talk about that, but here's an example of what that looks like. This is a whiteboard that we actually did. This was the first meeting we had about a project. And during that meeting, you won't be able to read all these little things, and it doesn't matter. But we had all these different Post-its for process. This was a new computer system. And then like the lines across from left to right were different user groups. And then you see that there's a bunch of little Post-its on the Post-its where we could say, is this going to be a Captivate? Is this going to be a print resource? Is this going to be in-person training? And we just labeled everything. And of course, I went and documented all this and wrote it up and sent it for formal review. But the great thing was, by having it right in front of people, I could get feedback right in the moment live, and we could play with it till it got to be correct. So when I say always be checking, that's what I mean. Is just present a little idea, see how it goes over, document it. I have a final poll question here for you, and then we'll wrap up. But which I know that, like, I was providing suggestions of what works for me, but what works for me doesn't work for everyone. And I realize that, and I love watching people with other styles. So I'm just wondering if you could give me a little information about what things do you think you bring to managing feedback. So if you could put that poll up. Thanks, Demetrius. What's the part about you that's really a strength when it comes to managing feedback? Oh, interesting. Okay, looks like we have 21 of 39 people here. So if we want to get a few more people to answer, then we'll shut it. Okay, Demetrius, will you go ahead and share the results on that? So it looks like a lot of people feel like they're really great at collaboration. That is super awesome, because honestly, the more you collaborate, the less surprises and the fewer formal feedback you're going to get. And then I see, that knowing your customers, your content, obviously that helps a lot as well. And being a planner, I like that. And I'm curious as to the other, what someone's other strength is. And you can put it in the chat if you want to. But I see Susan and Nicole, hi Nicole, mentioning here that yes, a visual representation tends to elicit much better feedback than verbal. And that sure seems to be true to me too. Like if you can put it in a diagram and present it, prototype and iterate early to get the feedback. Yes, I meant to talk about that and didn't, just the importance of kind of that rapid prototyping. Oh, that's what, yep, Barbara sent that to me too. She said, go ahead and just do something quickly, get a quick and dirty feedback on it. So thanks, Barbara Pearson. Is it possible to train your client to provide feedback? That is a really awesome thing. I don't feel like I have the opportunity to do that except in a subtle way, being an external consultant. But I think if I worked internally, I certainly would try to make that part of the culture of how to provide feedback in an effective way. I like that idea. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for me. I'm going to put on the screen one more time the Padlet that you can either copy your URL or look at the QR code. And I encourage you to continue to participate in this discussion. And otherwise, I'll turn it back to either Demetrius or Jim. I don't know if you usually do Q&A or not.
What questions do we have for Kathy? Well, I have one to start, Kathy. I loved your showing the sticky notes because I use sticky notes a lot when I am planning out a course and I'm doing the goal analysis and I'm trying to figure out what the topics are. But I'm interested in what other tools do you find helpful when you're giving and receiving, when you're receiving feedback, and trying to work through the organization of that feedback? Because I was the other one. I was the person who wrote "you do you" because I really don't know what I do. I know that I don't do it as well as I should. So what tools are you using is my question.
I'd like to hear from others. I mean, to me, like some of the tools that are in the e-learning, like review tools in Storyline and stuff, I think are super helpful for organizing feedback and for keeping track of like what's been resolved and what hasn't. And sometimes I'll go the extra step, but this is kind of manual. So if somebody has a more automated way to do it, I'd love to hear it of like writing down, like, here's all the feedback that is easy enough to just take care of. And we'll just check it off as done, but acknowledge, got this feedback. Here's some feedback that requires additional detail. And then here's a list of feedback that may be either conflicting or unclear that we need to discuss as a group. And I'll often share that with the team to just say, okay, here's the sum total of feedback and here's the little pile of it that we need to get back together and discuss. Does anybody else have any ideas?
Yeah, I see Becky Sims has written something. Becky, you want to speak to Mural and Review 360?
Yeah, thanks. Oh yeah, I mentioned Review 360, but go ahead.
Yeah, so hey everyone. So I'm pretty sure that everyone's familiar with Storyline, and you can do Review 360 when you publish something. So whether that's a RISE file or a Storyline articulate course. So that's just helpful being more digital. And then Mural is it's a program, basically a sticky note, right? Like Kathy, how you had on the board. And so what we can do is put things in there, and then as a collective whole, they can put their feedback in one place. So, and then PowerPoint, obviously, with the comments, and we can send them the document.
Yeah, those are good ones.
Thank you,
I'm
Becky.
Check out Mural. I don't know that one. And then Sue wrote, how would you say you develop this great skill set? Trial and error, input by others, training. Well, trial and error and just experience. And that's why I was Jim offered me to do whatever topic I wanted. And I thought, well, I have learned a lot about that over the years because I just continue to do it over and over again. And I do try to learn from my mistakes. So yeah. Oh, okay, thanks. So the link is mural.com. Old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet. Yeah. There you go, Jane.
It works, right? I'm old-fashioned. Some of this stuff is all great, but I rely on the spreadsheet. They all know what they've got. I know what I've got.
How do you use the spreadsheet specifically? What are you talking about?
Well, my spreadsheet has examples at the beginning, and I added to your board that we modify the inactionable or unactionable feedback examples based on whatever we're building. And then we give them some examples of how you would make that actionable, the same feedback, right? What do we need you to say rather than a question? And then we do one for every single module. So on that big call center, we built something like 40 modules. So we had a spreadsheet for each one. They have to sign off. So every place along the way, there's a column. They initial that they provided feedback. They initial they validated the feedback was incorporated. When it comes to sign off and questions at the last minute, we have all the evidence that they didn't give it or they got it and they said it was done correctly. So
awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did that answer the question? Oh, it was a question about tools. Does anybody else have any suggestions on tools to use to either gather or organize feedback? Barbara Pierce says, use a real mural. Your art back.
The artist, right, Barbara? That's our artist.
Any other questions from anyone?
Kathy, let me follow up on a question that Don Schirner asked. It's not so much about feedback, but do do you discuss with your clients, and at what point do you discuss with your clients what indicates project success?
Oh, sure. And that, and Bob, I think you should do a presentation on that, because I think it's a whole separate other discussion. But I think that upfront of like, when we're done with this, how will we know if we're successful? And asking that question like 6 different ways, like what measurable results will we see? How will people feel about it? You know, what intangible results will we just, you know, see? What can we measure, and what are the things that you would most like people to say at the end of this? I think asking all those questions is super helpful, and I think it's helpful to ask it of the biggest people on the project, but then of the other people as well. And I think a lot of times people aren't aware that other people do have different expectations or different definitions of success. So just kind of bringing that up in a non-confrontational way in a meeting to say, well, you know, I've heard that there are different visions of success, and here's some of the things that are important to different people. How can we prioritize this as a group? I think that's a great start.
Let me ask you, maybe you can give us a live example. So the hotel scenario, what were some of the measures of success that you had talked about, and you think you achieved those?
That's you picked like a super difficult one to ask about, because what we did, as big as it was just one part of a bigger effort that involved even more people. I mean, this was just like literally every person in the entire hotel chain was involved in this transformation. So I would say that what they would ultimately have agreed upon is that their little statement that they had, that I can't share, but their motto, what they would have said was, every person who works in that hotel should be able to say that that's our motto. Every interaction that we observe with every person at that hotel should exemplify that motto. And when we ask our customers about it, they may not know the words, but they should be able to perceive that. And we'll see that in our customer satisfaction scores.
Do you know whether they actually collected any data to see whether or not those goals were obtained?
I do, but I rolled off the project, so I don't have access to it. But they were very data driven. They had a lot of statistics that they gathered, especially they did regular employee surveys and regular customer surveys. So they did have that data.
So if you created the training, the results were very positive.
Kathy, we're getting ready to run out of time, but I see there's one or two things in the chat I want to make sure we get to. Becky asks, how do you deal with scope creep when everybody has ideas?
Yeah.
So why don't you take that?
I think the first thing you have to ask yourself is, did you have a really well-defined scope? So to me, like, that can just be like a one-page document, but it really should spell out like, well, this is the problem we're trying to address, and this is the solution that we're developing. I just did one last month where we had 8 micro-learnings, and each one had a scope document saying, this is the task that we're teaching in this micro-learning. These are the content points that we're addressing. These are the steps that are involved. This is how long it will be, like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever. And then they had to sign off on that. So like with a defined scope, then you can say, yeah, there's scope creep because you're going beyond what we agreed to. But it seems to me a lot of times when people say there's scope creep, like there really wasn't a properly defined scope to start with. And so it's creeping away from what? I don't even know. So I think that's part of it. And yeah, they do want to put everything in the solution. I do have one kind of hack on that. And that is, a lot of times, if you get someone and they just have something that's so dear to their heart and they want to include it so badly, I'll say, you know, perhaps we should consider having an advanced course or an additional learning opportunity or whatever it is. Like, I don't want to make it like it's all prepackaged training, and really explore this idea in more detail. And even if that never comes to pass, I think sometimes that allows people to just emotionally and mentally let go of some things that they know that they're in a tender place on a shelf somewhere where we can revisit them later.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and for everybody on this this Zoom call, I'd like to extend an appreciation and remind everybody that on February 26th, Jonathan Adams will be making a presentation related to usability. On March 12th, Nicole Alvarello, who's on this call, thank you, Nicole, will be talking about a redesign course moving towards an adaptive learning situation in which needs analysis, content analysis, design thinking, scenario-based questions were all part of it. And then on April 2nd, we're going to have our tribute to Roger Kaufman. That's very likely to last more than an hour. We're going to start at the usual 1:30 Eastern time. What we've done is we've lined up several people that work directly with Roger, and they're going to be talking about the impact that his work has had on their own thinking and profession. For those of you that are on the call, if Phil Grisey and I are trying to capture all of the people that worked with Roger at the Center for Needs Assessment and Planning, or perhaps Roger was the major professor. So if you're on this call and you worked for the Center for Needs Assessment and Planning at some point while you were a student here, or Roger was your major professor, would you please send me an email so that we have that, and we're going to, reach out to try to get all the CNAP people to that presentation. So at that, we thank Kathy and thank you all for your attendance. We'll see you on February 26th.